As stated previously, the key to American victory was newer weapons. The U.S. began remodeling its military in 1941, and as a result, its weapons were newer. Most of the Axis weapons were produced around 1935 or 1933 or so, and so as a result of this, most of those weapons by the end of the war were nearing a decade old. Even the British weapons, which had been built around 1939, were going on 5 years old, 6 years old by the end of the war. The U.S. had the newest weapons, the most advanced technology in terms of weapons. This, combined with their ability to churn out these weapons at an incredibly rapid rate, managed to make the U.S. Army unstoppable. Anything that was destroyed would be quickly replaced, and most weapons they had were newer and better engineered than the weapons of the enemies they were going up against. So the war in Europe. U.S. and Britain attack from the west, hitting France on the D-Day invasion and continuing their advance through the liberation of Paris, the Battle of the Bulge under General Patton, and all the way into West Germany. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union counters the Nazis at Stalingrad, luring them in for the harsh Russian winter, and just as the Tsars had beaten the Baltic states under Peter the Great, and beaten the French when Napoleon tried to invade, so too did they triumph over Hitler. The Wehrmacht, the German army, was forced into retreat, and the Red Army pursued them all the way up unto Berlin. Soviets take Berlin in 1945, and the war ends. Adolf Hitler puts a bullet in his brain. Now, American weapons were used by all three Allies during the war. The U.S. became the great armory of the Allied cause, providing weapons and munitions to all the countries under the Allies, both in Europe as well as in Asia. Now, speaking of the war in Asia, Now, there had been an early plan in which the U.S. was going to be using China as a launch pad for its attacks on Japan. The plan being to unite the Communists under Mao Zedong and the Nationalists under Chiang Kai-shek into one united Chinese army to fight against the Japanese invasion. This plan quickly deteriorated. Chiang Kai-shek was weary of the Communists, so weary, in fact, that he was willing to entertain collaboration with the Japanese if it meant a united effort against Mao. The U.S. eventually could not put up with this indecisiveness and were forced to find an alternate route. This led to the costly campaign of island hopping. Battles like Iwo Jima and Guadalcanal became massive battles as the U.S. attempted to fight its way through the archipelago of islands leading to Japan. And the U.S. also saw massive naval battles like the Battle of Midway, in which the U.S. fleet and the Imperial Japanese fleet squared off against each other. This led to a massive innovation, the role of aircraft. Prior to this, warfare had, for the last several centuries, in fact, since the time of the defeat of the Spanish Armada, the standard wisdom in warfare, it was that the strength of a nation's army depended on the ships and depended on the long-range guns, the long-range artillery positioned upon those ships. This is a trend that dates all the way back to the 1500s, when the Spanish Armada was defeated by a lighter English fleet using long-range guns and fire ships. This trend led to the development of the ships of the line, which were popular in the 18th century, the heavy frigates like the USS Constitution, and later to the development of the armored battleships of the 20th century. For the first time in history, the armored battleship was entirely relegated to the second class, as aircraft carriers became the main bringers of destruction, as bomb-carrying planes and torpedo-carrying planes ended up being the main weapons of war in the Pacific. In many cases, naval battles were waged between fleets that never actually saw each other directly, or rather fought between their aircraft. This is actually one of the reasons why the battleships ceased to be produced after World War II. Now, atomic bombs. The final weapon, the weapon that ends World War II and ends the fighting in Asia, is 2 atomic bombs. And we're going to discuss more about them as we enter the dawn of the atomic age. So the United States government launches the Manhattan Project. Now, the Manhattan Project is launched at the behest of a newly immigrated scientist by the name of Albert Einstein. Albert Einstein had originally been German. He was also Jewish. When the Nazis began their persecution of the Jews, many Jewish physicists fled Germany. Now, Einstein, like many other physicists, was aware of the theory of relativity, which was the famous E equals mc squared. Now, as those of you who will take physics next year will soon be made aware, the E in this scenario stands for energy. Now, the amount of energy contained inside a given piece of matter is equal to its mass times the speed of light squared, the m being mass, c being the speed of light. So, what this means is that every small piece of matter, if converted into energy, has an absolutely intense volume of energy contained within it. Now, one of the issues that comes up is the possibility of nuclear fission, which will later be experimented and weaponized in the Manhattan Project. The idea of trying to release this energy as an explosion. Now, Einstein himself was not personally involved in the Manhattan Project. Oppenheimer was. Upon finishing the project, Oppenheimer is said to have quoted the Hindu text, the Hindu scripture, and said, "Now I am become death, destroyer of worlds." And the Manhattan Project was top secret. So top secret, in fact, that the vice president did not know its existence. Yes. As insane as that sounds, when FDR died and his vice president assumed the office, this man was suddenly informed that the United States already had a nuclear bomb that it had been developing for years. That's a fission bomb. So again, this meaning that the explosion is created by attempting to divide a very large and unstable radioactive atom. This process is referred to as nuclear fission. Now, there are two nuclear bombs produced, the Fat Man and the Little Boy bomb. Now, both of these bombs operate off of nuclear fission, one using uranium-238 and the other using plutonium as its fuel source. Now, it should be noted, very little about how these weapons would actually work was entirely known. In fact, it is said that when the first atomic bomb was tested in the field tests in Arizona, several nuclear scientists were basically crossing their fingers that it didn't create a chain reaction and light the atmosphere on fire. Yes, they were not entirely sure if it would do that, and yet they tried it anyway, which is very interesting. As a result, the U.S. Army would spend the next few decades watching the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and in the process of watching them, would learn several interesting things about atomic weaponry. Besides the fact that it has the power to entirely vaporize people within a relatively small radius, the blast zone, it also had the effect that not all of the radioactive material was destroyed in the explosion. The result being that large volumes of radioactive isotopes were left in the cities, producing cancer in many of the people that continued to live in the cities. This was not an intended consequence. However, it's something that's stuck with the United States for years. Whenever you hear about fears of dirty bombs, this is precisely what they're worried about bombs that would leave large traces of radioactive residue to cause cancer and other diseases in a given area. So, that so far has been the U.S. in World War II. In coming lessons, we will talk about some other particulars of the war, but this is the general overview of the war. Thank you so much. Goodbye.